Hello and welcome to another edition of FF News Virtual Arena, where this time we'll be discussing everybody's favourite hot topic, AI, but taking perhaps a little more forensic look at where the true potential of this emerging technology could lie for financial institutions and banks. And to help discuss this topic, I'm joined by Marco Li Mandri from ING, Ranil Boteju from Lloyds Bank, and Kevin Staples from software development company BBD. And they are all experts in their field and ideally placed to discuss the true potential of LLMs and AI in banking. So without further ado, we'll kind of dive into this discussion. First of all, it would be great if you could all introduce yourselves and your roles. Ranil, perhaps I'll start with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm Ranil Boteju. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Lloyds Banking Group. I'm accountable for the strategy and delivery of the bank's data and AI strategy. As you can imagine, the last years has been incredibly busy as AI has finally taken off, and really feel like the 20 years of my previous career, it's all come good now with basically people really recognizing the true potential of AI.
Excellent, thanks. And Marco?
Here. Yes, nice to be with you. Marco here. I'm part of ING Analytics. ING Analytics is the team in ING that globally delivers all the use cases around AI and genAI. I'm the head of strategy there. A bit subscribe to what Ranil said. It's a very exciting moment. We've been doing this for many years, and now we have great technology and great aura around us to get this done.
Excellent, thanks. And Kevin?
Thanks for joining me here today. My name's Kevin Staples. I'm the Group CEO for BBD, but in reality, I'm a hardcore software engineer and technologist, and I've spent the last close to 3 decades at BBD using the latest technologies to transform and innovate for my customers. And BBD's a fairly large technology consulting company. We were born out of South Africa, but have offices in UK and Europe. And we've got global customer base, but a lot of that is heavily weighted towards the banking sector. And one of my passions over the last 2 decades has been language models, and I've used it on and off wherever I could, and very much in the last 4 years.
Excellent, yeah, and I think it's a great panel. We've kind of got the sort of the technology perspective, somebody who's kind of really deeply embedded in that on the kind of on the technology side, and then 2 experts within banking as well that are kind of soaking in this emerging space, but as you rightly pointed out, something that's really been developing and growing for many years and seems to be sort of entering maturity. According to Gartner, popular source of expertise, AI is at the top of the hype cycle. We kind of have certainly seen that happen in the mainstream, but it seems to kind of be coming into land slightly perhaps in industry, discovering the real benefits, the real ROI for this technology. Marco, what are some ways that banks can effectively use AI right now?
Well, I think from ING point of view, we have been using AI for many years now, so we will develop a sensibility on what works and what doesn't. But I think our position is quite simple there. There's a lot of potential that AI has, and including genAI. It will be quite transformative, maybe as the invention of the internet, I think, in the long term. A common misconception is that this is easy. Building this system takes quite some craft in terms of like the more you go into core system, the more monitoring, Q&A, and all these kind of things you need to think of. But also there is quite a demand in terms of making the system safe, and that's especially true for banking. So that's really what customers expect, safety first. So how do you bring it all together? I think that's very much dependent for every bank. But I think in our case, we focus on a few things. The first thing is scale. So we identify area, domain, use case that can scale across all the countries, all the markets where we are operating. So the use case should be applicable to more than one country. Second one is about domain. So we really focus this technology first on the domain that can achieve a certain value at scale. And that, of course, can depend for every bank. In our case, we see a lot of potential in the contact center space, a lot of potential also in the marketing personalization, where AI can really bring additional value. KYC is also an area where we are quite investing. There is a lot that AI, traditional AI, generative AI can do to support analysts in their work. And also two more areas which are very relevant for us is software engineering, of course, where we can new technology can support that process. And the last one is in wholesale banking, where we have quite a commitment in sustainability. We think AI, generative AI, can help in extracting data, make the lending process a bit faster, and then enable it a bit sustainability ambition that ING has.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And Kevin, perhaps from your perspective of kind of working with LLMs, what would you say to this?
Yes, Tim, I think your statement on the Gartner hype cycle, and more specifically, I think it's the generative AI side of it that's at that hype cycle. And as a tech consulting company that's been going so many decades, we're well familiar with this trend of how technologies get adopted. We tend not to focus on that. We know it's inevitable, especially with a tech where there's this much hype about it and where its transformative abilities are so high. It's inevitable it's going to head into a form of trough of disillusionment. But for us, we tend to take that perspective of the tech consulting company, and I like to put it into three categories where it's going to get adopted across the banks, and for that matter, a lot of corporates. And the first category is the obvious category of all of us as staff. We're tending to use these tools already just in our day-to-day job as efficiency tools. And then the second category is what I call back office processing. And certainly across the banks and our banking customers, we do a lot of process engineering, process re-engineering work with our customers on our digital transformation projects. And there we're already seeing that for us, it's a fantastic new tool that we've got in our arsenal that we can use within process and process re-engineering. And that's the category of use case that's within reach. It's relatively straightforward to get there. I think, as Marco said, none of it's easy, and we'll get to some of that detail later. But then the third category is what I call customer-facing applications. And for me, this is the holy grail, and one that I'm quite passionate about. And it's in the form of the digital twin of the personal banker. I believe most banking customers in the future will probably have their own digital twin of a personal banker. And this is one that I've been actively working with our clients to achieve. And it's hard. There's a lot of complexities in achieving this one. And are we there yet? We're not quite there yet, but we're overcoming a myriad of technical and business and risk complexities to head in that direction.
Sounds like a really, really exciting space. And Ranil, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well, the sort of top level. How do you see it being used, perhaps in your experience and going forward?
Hey, so look, I think the first thing I'd say is, most of us have actually been doing AI for at least 20 or 30 years. So we've had AI systems for various KYC ID processes, for automation for decades now. We've had machine learning for 20, 30 years as well. So I think the broader AI machine learning piece it's a well-trodden path. Obviously, the new thing, the new kid on the block is the generative AI aspect. So that obviously burst on the scene with ChatGPT in October of 22. But one thing I will say though is, if you think about the technology hype cycles we've seen, right? So we've seen distributed ledger, blockchain, Web3, metaverse, quantum. These are all really massively hyped technologies. And let's be honest, right? None of them really landed. None of them really have made the impact as of yet. They're all very much top-down driven, right? With generative AI, it was completely different. So, ChatGPT came out in October of 22. Within 3 or 4 months, at the bank I work, Lloyds Banking Group, we had engineers and platform teams all over the bank, off their own bat, using large language models, trying to use various open source tools, and off their own bat, people were finding that this is a technology that they're actually using to solve real problems, right? So I've never seen that, right? So just that organic growth of use cases popping up. And so we realized, actually, maybe this isn't hype. This is, I gave it 3 or 4 months, but after that I was like, you know what, this is not hype. And so we've now started to funnel all of our use cases into basically about 4 categories. So some of the other speakers have touched. Engineering, definitely one of them, right? So lots of opportunities for engineers to use various coding co-pilots for code translation, automating test cases, automating documentation, creating synthetic data, a whole bunch of opportunities. We've started to progress those, right? The second is basically creating a set of tools to help frontline colleagues. So things like call summarizers, knowledge management tools, post-call quality assessments, very important when you're selling financial services products, various training approaches, all can be built with generative AI. They're all working quite well. And then thirdly, we've had a bunch of tools really focused on the back office. So complaints, underwriting, originations, claims, all of these, again, lots of opportunities, lots of use cases that we're starting to see. And then there's kind of a fifth element that we're being a bit more cautious with, which is exposing some of the generative capabilities directly to customers. This is an area that as a bank, we've basically paused on until we have the right guardrails in place. So all of the other use cases, there's always a human in the loop, or they're very much focused internally. So we feel the risks are quite low. But in terms of exposing directly to customers, we want to wait until the guardrails are a bit more mature, so that'll be probably early next year. But the summary is, this is definitely, I don't feel it's, I feel it's very different to the previous technology false storms we've had with some of those other technologies. Widespread adoption, not just in organizations, but across society. And I'm really convinced that this is definitely a general purpose technology that will transform, the way most organizations function, in the same way that electricity did when that first came out.
Wow, yeah, that's great to hear. And Ranil, staying with you, do you think actually to kind of maybe enable adoption and make people's understanding of this and perhaps the customer's understanding of this easier, do we need to change the way we actually talk about AI and generative AI and maybe focus it more on LLMs and large language models which have been discussed and really actually that's where the real development is taking place?
Do you know what? So there is a lot of fear in society, right? So I'm going to blame, the Terminator movie for a lot of that. I think everyone thinks Skynet's coming. And one of the things that's really important is when we talk about AI is talk about how we're using it. And we are, as a bank, using it for things that humans can't do or find incredibly repetitive, right? So I'll give you an example. So personalization, it's been the holy grail for decades now to get to one-to-one personalized interactions. So all of your messaging, your comms, your mobile space, all personalized down to you as an individual. That is something that human beings can never do. We can never do that, right? So even like where we got to is segments, which are not personalized, right? Even the smallest segments, we still have hundreds of thousands of people in it. So, but AI, these can actually help solve that really, that personalization one-to-one, right? So that's something humans can't do. And then the second area is there's lots of tasks that humans really don't want to do, right? So in our organization, we have to do, we often get involved in various, having to go through like KYC processes or, check documents. And these involve human beings having to manually look at multiple documents, all look at different formats, and then basically work through, what insight do I need to extract from that? It's incredibly tedious, incredibly boring, and it takes human beings away from what they should be doing, which is actually using that data and actually solving a problem. Instead, they're doing that data collection piece. Again, this is a task that we can use AI for. And I think we need to really focus on this is what we want to use it for, rather than replacing human beings. So I don't think there's been enough of a narrative around how this is going to really supplement what human beings do. Now, obviously, there will be roles that are much more impacted, but in the main, if I think about the roles in banking, it's about doing things we can't do, or freeing up the repetitive tasks so that humans can actually do more of the value-added work.
Yeah, and we'll kind of get onto the kind of perhaps the perception of AI and the impact of AI in a moment. Kevin, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on how what are the next steps to implementing LLMs in banking? What's that going to require?
I think here, to my perspective is potentially going to come from a slightly different angle to potentially Ranil's and Marco's. Given that I'm a technologist in a tech consulting company, and really we get to focus in, and certainly if you understand the scope of Ranil and Marco's mandates and responsibilities across their organizations, for us as the tech people, it's usually quite straightforward. But I am finding that there is almost this perfect storm. If you combine banking and a lot of the risks and the risk profiles they have to be so cognizant of in banks, and large language models and these inherent risks we're all talking about, and they're real. And that's together with, you consider the sheer rate that these generative AI models are advancing in the world, it's quite terrifying, and that almost creates that perfect storm of leaving an organization in a position of not knowing how to go forward, and with a significant amount of inertia and sometimes an inability to move forward, potentially quite often related to some of the risk elements. And so my preferred approach on this sort of thing, and when you're faced with this sort of scenario on a technology that's inherently not definitive, the outcome is not guaranteed. We all know that where we set out to use it, we might not achieve the objective we're going to try and use it for. And so in those scenarios, my go-to approach is often the proof of concept approach, where we take a mindset of let's fail fast. And within that mindset, you've got to understand that because these technologies are changing so fast, anything you do today is probably going to be wrong tomorrow. You're probably going to adopt text today, and tomorrow there's a better tech, or it's not as appropriate as the latest text. So you've got to become very agile and very fast at adopting the text, failing fast if you need to, and know that you're going to probably be replacing some of these texts quite rapidly in a short space of time. And all of that is okay if you're pretty diligently watching your business use cases. Keep it simple, look at those use cases that are going to have a high degree of value, then dive in, solve the problem, and realize pretty quickly if you're failing, and you can change tack or achieve the use case and move on to a next great value use case.
Great, yeah. And Marco, for you, how do you see these being implemented in kind of day-to-day banking?
Well, I agree with some of the things that Kevin mentioned. I think from my point of view, it's the part that you really need to figure out for implementing at scale. So traditionally in this space, there was always the tendency from data science to really focus on algorithm and let someone else take care about how to make the system robust in terms of risk management. And that's changing. So now we know that if you want to build a system, you want to embed it in certain processes. If these processes are a core for the bank, you need to have things like scalable monitoring, way to monitor the system at scale when there are a lot of interaction. So that's one. You need a quality assurance, which is data-driven. And you also need components which you can reuse, because otherwise you are not going to be able to monitor it, maintain it in a scalable way. If you want to achieve all of that, what you really need to have is a very good roadmap. So what are really the use cases that you focus on? What are the things that are going to transform the bank? I think this is really the key. But if you don't have it, you should have it, and then the rest will follow. That's one. It's a bit more technical implementation side. The other angle is on people. So we know we need to educate all employees, not just the one using the system, on the risk and on the opportunities that this tool can bring. That's one. And the other part where we see real importance, we see an increased need for what we call AI product leader, which are the people that actually shape this technology. They know a certain banking domain, they understand IT, they understand analytics, and they can somehow create the system, taking care about the craft and so on. That's very hard role. It's really about talent. How do you create this figure? It's really one of the focus, at least for us.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the role humans will play in facilitating this course is incredibly important. Kevin, what would you say to companies who are perhaps hesitant or unsure about implementing LLMs in their workflow, perhaps for some of those reasons? What are some of the major understandings around this? And I'll get Ranil's thoughts on this as well, I suppose.
Tim, I'm going to jump in first on the misunderstandings. I think for me, one of the misunderstandings, and I think Marco said it earlier, is that it's easy. And the second aspect to it is it's often understood to be a data science domain. And by my experience, it's actually such a broad range of skills and domains that are needed to actually use these LLMs. I think I was reading a stat recently that 87% of data science projects never make it to production. And I think it comes from the sort of misunderstanding or naivety about, cool, yes, you do need your data science, but you also need data engineering. You're needing your cloud platform engineering, you're needing your ML ops, you're needing your software engineering. And all of that, it's a very hard integration space, especially in an existing bank, to be able to implement these large language models into prod where you're using them and you're looking after them, you're monitoring them, and you're ensuring the outcomes you want to achieve. So I think that's one of the key misunderstandings that people need to understand is it's a vast array of domains and specializations that you've got to assemble together, and then you've got to get them to work quite efficiently together to overcome these problems. I think on the aspect of customers that haven't yet dived into their journey and haven't yet understood how to get traction, I think it's understandable. You know, if you take a lot of the problems, the complexities, the risks, and as a business leader, you really do need to be accountable for the money you're spending in an organization and the value you're going to generate for the organization spending that money. And for me, given all of these complexities and that just by nature, it's not a guaranteed outcome and it's not definitive and it's not going to necessarily turn out the way you want. One of my go-to approaches then is just dive in. And so I would suggest to any leader in that position, just dive into it, find the right skills and partners, understand that you need to fail fast, you need to realize value very fast. You've got to be very agile in adopting tech, and you've got to be pretty aggressive in terms of your ability to chop and change your tech as time moves on, as better things become available. And then I suppose just to let them know that it's going to be a bumpy ride adopting it, but quite an exhilarating ride.
Yeah, well, indeed, hopefully. And Ranil, for you, what would you say are kind of some of the big challenges to implementing this in a kind of financial institution's workflow? What are the big concerns around AI is obviously accuracy and truth, and potentially even wrongful discrimination, and what are called hallucinations. How do financial institutions work to prevent this?
You know, machine learning, AI, data science, these things have been around for like 20, 30 years in banks. There's been lots of controls. They're always oversighted by quite stringent model oversight policies. We've all had like heads of AI ethics for many years. And so the broader piece has been well governed, well controlled, the risks very well understood. Generative AI posed some new additional risks. So basically, we kind of looked around the world to sort of understand, well, you know, what do we need to do differently? And in the US, they came up with a framework from the National Institute of Statistics and Technology. It's called the NIST framework. Basically, that had like 12 different types of risks that were very specific to generative AI. So it was things like, see if I can name, so we actually used 10, but it was hallucination, misinformation, misalignment, toxicity. There were risks around, people doing prompt jailbreaking, IP. There's various risks related to basically data, sharing data inadvertently, economic crime, and I think the last one was sustainability. So 10 new risks. And basically what we've been doing is for each of those risks, working through what are some of the manual controls you can put in place, and then what are some of the more automated controls. So for example, hallucination is a risk. So this is where your generative AI model comes up with output that looks correct but is just made up. So you know, generative AI, it's basically predicting the next word. It may seem sentient, but all it's doing is predicting the next word. So the risk is that it predicts the next word, but it creates gibberish. So the very easiest way to protect against that is you could actually build your models and do a lot more what's called retrieval augmented generation. So you can actually do a lot of that upfront. So it's trained on a much more precise data set. You can do something called red teaming, where you actually get a group of people to pose questions at the sort of you know, your generative AI and see what answers you get, and then if they're wrong, sort of correct those. There's an approach called basically what is it, ground truthing, where you actually compare the answers against a known database of answers. But the one that we use in the main is basically human in the loop, right? So until we're really confident that the answers are correct, we basically have a human in the loop whose job it is to look at that and basically verify that. So that's an example of you know, how we mitigate those risks. The second thing I'd say though, so there's the risks of getting things wrong. In terms of scaling though, so at a bank, the biggest challenge is, obviously we need to mitigate these risks, but the biggest challenge is having a tech stack that enables you to really scale you know, your you know, models in a very consistent way. So when we first started, we had lots of people doing use cases. A lot of them, I think, to the points that you know, Kevin made, not scalable, right? So people would spend ages on a use case, and then it turns out it doesn't scale into production. So think about the time effort. We found people, you know, duplicating, building things on all sorts of you know, kind of non-target you know, kind of platforms. So what we've started to do is really build out like a very clear target architecture for what are the capabilities that we need in place that enables us to scale consistently. And unfortunately, these things do take a while to build, right? So we're building on our cloud platform. It takes time to build, but that's really the long tent in the pole. So until we've got that fully in place, you know, we're not going to be able to scale consistently. It means that, you know, it's just a lot of use cases that may or may not land. So those are the two things. It's getting your risks understood and then mitigants in place, both manual and automated. And then secondly, having a platform that enables you to scale and put things into production easily in a very consistent way.
Yeah, excellent. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think on my side, some very similar experiences to what Ranil's talking about. So, but I think what we're seeing is the various risks. They're very much real and they are there, but they're heavily dependent on the use case you're using it for. And so it's not necessarily a one size fits all. And then we've got similar arsenal of tools that we use to mitigate or compensate or overcome. And often we find that a matching up of a whole range of those. So whether it's the RAG and the various guardrails, human in a loop, great one. We use it wherever we need to. And then here and there, we borrow on our software engineering tool sets and approaches, things like canary testing and parallel runs, our automation testing approach, where you partition off a chunk of the data set that you're using for training for purposes of assessing and testing the model. And then forms of orchestration, as we call it, for narrowing down the domain and the risk profile to very specific things, but highly dependent by my experience on the specific use cases you're using it for. And in some cases it's a lot easier, and in some it's really, really complex and hard. And I suppose to put it out there, I think we're not there yet, and seemingly no one in the world yet in a bank is there. But I think it's a journey we're probably going to be seeing come true somewhere in the future.
Marco, do you have any thoughts on kind of mitigating the risks that come with implementing this technology?
Yes, I think a few years ago, to scale AI, the challenge was really data and platform. And now I think we collectively mature. So I think you know that you need a platform, you need a certain data strategy, data close to where your analytics is. I think a lot of organizations are progressing there. But as Ranil said, it's a matter of execution. Building this platform centralized with all the controls around takes time, but at least it's clear. You know what to do. And I think the part about risk, well, it's an open challenge. I think it's quite interesting, but like intellectually, how do we build system at scale, when you have million interaction, where you can monitor the quality of the system in near real time. So it's technically quite exciting. It's where our best people are working on. What we see is that it works well when it's not something that you solve only from the analytics point of view. So when you include people from risk, people from the business, senior to think that along. I think banks have a lot of experience in this already, and it's mostly about how do you translate the philosophy of how you manage risk in a world which is increasingly data driven. Of course, the outcome is the same, but the way to get there, it's different.
Yeah. And just staying with you, Marco, obviously banking has experienced kind of major shifts in the last decade. The biggest thing essentially being the kind of the move to apps and the focus on digital banking, and that's kind of really changed the way that many consumers interact with their banks. What do you think the next big shift for consumer banking is in the next few years, in the next decade?
I think something that I always say to our teams is always remind them about the 70s or the 80s, where computing was invented, and then we put a computer in everybody's desk, and we assumed that just by doing that, productivity will increase. But if you look at the statistics, it's called the follow paradox. Productivity did not increase, because for a long time we just put a computer in every process, and then things were pretty much the same. So we try not to do the same with AI. I think somebody mentioned it before. You try to do the opposite. You start from the technology, start from the domain. How can you re-engineer an entire process? And then practically, how we try to do it, we try to link it to certain outcomes. So for example, if you look at our processes, we measure the STP rate, which means straight-to processing. Every time something can be automated, we measure that KPI for all the key banking process, and we try to link AI to that. And from a customer point of view, it means that certain processes, certain decisions happen faster in a more automated way. If you think about granting a loan, it can be way faster than it is today. So that's a bit what customer can expect, a bit faster decision. It was mentioned before about hyper-personalization. I think that's going to be quite a big shift. And the part which is also very important for us in sustainability. So we really have this ambition to steer our customer towards sustainability. And that we can do increasingly well thanks to AI. So to do that, you need to make data-driven decisions, you need to collect a lot of data. And we think that also AI can help achieve that outcome.
Ranil, finally from you, what for you does the next next 5-10 years look like in terms of how banking will really be impacted?
Yes, so I feel we're going to head to a stage where rather than just using AI, generative AI, to augment what we do, I think we'll get to the point where more and more organizations, to be honest, they'll tend to be fintechy type organizations or some of the tech type, they'll start to reimagine what banking actually is. So if you think about banking, right, so it's been around for hundreds of years, and we basically just kind of layer on new technologies. What we haven't really done is reimagine what the bank should be. And so in the next kind of 5 years, right, so I really expect to see people starting with a blank piece of paper, really thinking through, well, what is the role of a bank in a person's life? And if you had AI as one of your core tools, what would that look like? And so I think that's definitely something that I really see happening. And I think people will learn from the mistakes of digital and mobile, right? So think about when most banks went through the whole digital transformation like 10, 15 years ago, right? So basically everyone, what they did was they took their paper-based applications and basically just digitized those. They didn't think about, how do I reimagine what this could be? And it's only now that people are starting to do that. I think we've wisened up to that, and we'll see a lot more of a, let's throw what we do today. Let's start from scratch. Let's try and think through, what does a reimagined bank look like? Whether it's how you open an account, how you get serviced, how you get wealthy, right? So I think that will be something that is going to be quite interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see who survives that and who doesn't.